All right, everyone, it is 12:02. I appreciate all of you all for jumping on our call today. So, as you all know, today's big topic is VA loans, and specifically information that's going to be relevant to you all as agents. There's going to be some background that's financial related, but there's also going to be some stuff that's very specific to how you can grow a VA portfolio of clients and how that works. So, I'm going to get started with the first slide here. If anyone has any questions, there will be a questions and answer section at the end. You can also, if you want to go ahead and throw those questions in the chat, we can go through them. But what is a VA home loan? So a VA home loan is a mortgage benefit earned through military service. It's guaranteed by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Essentially, that's verbiage to essentially say it is a government-backed program specifically for certain members of the military and their spouses so that they can obtain home ownership through an easier medium. This is a really awesome program, and the main benefit that we see for clients, specifically the veterans, is that it is a no down payment requirement. For all your other loan programs, you either have to do USDA, which is rural housing only, or you have to have down payment assistance to offset the down payment to have a no down payment scenario for a client. So having the access to a VA home loan is really cool. Also, it has no PMI. So even though you're putting or your client is putting 0% down, no down payment at all, they are not going to have PMI, which is anywhere from 50 to several $100s in monthly savings. Therefore making that mortgage more affordable to the veteran and their families. And then, of course, to also make it more affordable, it has competitive rates. It is a very good rate program. So if you're looking at average daily rates, you're typically going to see your VA rate be anywhere from a quarter to even sometimes up to 0.75% lower than that of the conventional home loan. So I use the term screaming rates. That's what VA home loans are. They have a great rate benefit. And so for very well qualified veterans, those that can qualify for any and all the programs, we almost always go with the VA program specifically because it has that no PMI, it has that competitive rate, and if they don't, want to put a down payment, they don't have to. If they do, they can, and it still comes out better. So it's a great program for veterans, but it is backed by the U.S. government. It is there to help veterans obtain home ownership. So who qualifies? This is always a big question because not everyone that's part of the military will qualify. Anyone that's active duty with 90 continuous days of active service does qualify. Veterans that are honorable or general discharge after meeting service minimums. So they do have to meet some service requirements to be considered a veteran that qualifies for a VA home loan benefit. If they're National Guard and reserves, they require 6 years of service or that 90-day active duty during wartime. A lot of National Guard members have served in some capacity overseas on active duty, and so a lot of them don't need to have that 6 years in the National Guards, but otherwise they do. And then there are benefits that extend to surviving spouses. So unremarried spouses of veterans who died in service or from service-connected disability do also qualify. So understating entitlement. There's a word in this type of loan program called VA entitlement. It's a buzzword. Essentially, entitlement means does the veteran have entitlement to be able to do a VA home loan with the VA benefits? There's a basic entitlement of $36,000. This is what the VA originally set the program up as, and it allows for a loan up to $144,000 with no down payment. Most buyers today are going to use the bonus entitlement that we see on this section on the right on the slide. This is where there's no cap in most counties above the loan, and they're entitled to no down payment on any loan amount. Now, it's important to note for this third bullet, restored when prior VA loan is paid off. If a veteran has a VA home loan and they've charged a level of entitlement to that first home purchase, and they want to buy a new home with the VA loan program, we have to do an entitlement calculation to see how much they can get for their next home and to decide how much down payment, if any, is required. In some cases, a veteran can have two VA loans outstanding and still not pay a loan amount or have a minimum down payment. In other cases, they may have to bridge the gap. So, for instance, I actually have a client right now who's pre-approved, moving from Alabama to North Carolina. They currently have a VA home loan. Okay, and so they're buying a relatively high purchase price. In North Carolina, they're buying around 750, and so when I did the entitlement calculation, I needed about 4% down payment to make it work without them selling their home. So they of course can sell the home, restore their entire entitlement, and still have no down payment requirement. But in this case, they didn't want to sell the home before; they wanted to sell the home after. So I did that calculation and was able to get them pre-approved for about 735,000 with only 4% down payment. So that's already less than conventional. That's just a hair over FHA. So even if someone's using dual entitlement, we are still able to make it work at a very competitive down payment. So this is pretty cool. But entitlement essentially is more for the lending side, but for you all to know, it's how much we can overall lend to them without a down payment, and if they need to do a down payment, how much that can be. All right, so the VA home loan benefits. I've already touched on a couple of these, but just to kind of go back to it. 0% down payment, 0 PMI, lower rates. It's a lifetime benefit. So, it's not a use it once, lose it kind of scenario. They can use this for life. There's easier qualifications. So, for instance, typical debt to income ratio maximum for a conventional home loan is somewhere in the high 40s to 50%. For most clients, they're going to, kind of lose the ability to qualify at that point in time. For a VA home loan, theoretically, you can go infinite. Like I've seen pre-approvals, or I've seen clients get approved at 60% debt to income. Now, I don't advocate for that as a lender, a client having 60% of their income go towards their housing expense. But in theory, you can qualify a client at a higher debt to income with a VA home loan. So that is a huge benefit of the program, because some of these veterans, they're put in MSAs that are expensive, but they're earning government salaries, right? So they don't have as much money as maybe everyone else, and so being able to still get a home is a huge importance to them, for them and their families. And so this program has that more flexibility on the debt to income, allowing them to then purchase the home. No prepayment penalty. Now, it's pretty common nowadays for your conventional, your FHA loans to not have prepayment penalties. VA is no different. There's no prepayment penalties. So if the veteran wants to prepay it, large increments, or fully, pay it off, they're completely entitled to do so. Matter of fact, if someone has the means, we encourage that, right? Get yourself, debt free, so on and so forth. So there is no prepayment penalty. All right, so how do you find VA eligible clients? So if you have clients in your Rolodex, the first thing you can do is, as part of your traditional reach outs, and do you have anyone that that's served, veteran, etc. And you can have that be an introduction. Say, hey, I do help veteran buyers, and if you know anyone that is looking at buying a home, more than happy to do so. Since I'm in North Carolina, Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg is the big military base here, amongst a few. And so you can establish connections, networking groups, etc. In your various base areas. One of the ways that I'm introducing myself to veterans, especially the Fort Bragg area, is I have several friends and close family that have either lived out there, serving out there, so on and so forth. And so they do introductions for me to people that are either in the units or just casually drop my name. There's other ways that you can get access to different groups that are helping the veterans, but networking in those areas, specific to wherever you are. Not just Fort Liberty / Fort Bragg, but in states like South Carolina, Georgia, other bases, very important. PCS relocation buyers. These are permanent change of station buyers. These buyers, they want to get a home and they want to get it fast because they've been given orders to change to a new station, and so they're already getting a military housing allowance, which we'll talk about in a second. They're going to want to buy, and they're going to want to buy quick. So networking with the bases and the various services that are around the bases, can really help with getting a hold of these people before they get a hold of someone else. So finding the relo, your connection to the relo buyers is very important, especially if you're trying to help more veterans. There's a lot of community groups, so local VFW posts, American Legion chapters, Facebook groups. These are all referral opportunities, and if you do something for their group, they're going to do something back for you in return. They're very appreciative, the veteran community, so if you volunteer your time and energy to various causes that they have, they'll typically reciprocate. I typically look at veteran groups just like a BNI meeting. So for any of y'all that have done BNI meetings in the past, everyone's there to kind of help everyone. Obviously their main goal in these chapters is to help the veterans themselves. So as long as you're providing some form of benefit to the veterans, you can get that back. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron Craw in this meeting, he's part of Home for Heroes, which is a program that you give a percentage of your commission back to the veteran and their family. This is a very common program that a lot of people use to be able to share in the value add to the veterans. And so if you offer some service like that, these groups are going to heavily promote that, especially with a little bit of help from you. All right, so military relocation professional, MRP. So this is a certification that allows you to basically advertise that you are a professional, certified relocation specialist for the military. So basically what it covers is VA loan benefits and how to explain them to buyers. A lot of times that's what our job is. So you don't have to focus as much on it, but it is part of the course. It talks to you about, or it goes over the PCS move process and the timeline. So for a permanent change of service or change of station, situations, you'll be an expert in how to guide those veterans, into their permanent housing situation and understand that from a better level. You'll also get a very big overview of military basic allowance for housing, BAH as that's commonly known as. And you, of course, will discuss in the certification, the military culture, how that goes into their buying decisions, so on and so forth. This certification, it's not a requirement to do business with veterans. It's not a requirement to do business with military professionals, but it does get you a certification that you can use as part of your marketing. And it does matter. You can be listed in the NAR's official MRP agent directory. It does build credibility. I think for those that have been around for at least a year, I've always heard of military buyers using institutions for lending like Navy Federal or USAA. These institutions that kind of blur the lines of civilian to government connection. Those companies, they're not connected to the military at all, but veterans seem to think that they are, right? And the reason that they do is because they build themselves, with the correct marketing, that they are there to help veterans and do work for veterans and service members and so on and so forth. And it's no different on the real estate side. So if you get a certification like this, you can advertise yourself, to those veterans and to those service members as someone that specifically helps this grouping of people. And in return, that'll get you, the credence and the credibility that you may not otherwise have. It also will differentiate you in the market because not every agent's going to have one. I actually don't see too many agents with this credential. It's not to say that people don't have them. It's just not as common. And I don't know if it's because of the cost, which I don't particularly think is all that expensive, or if it's just because a lot of agents haven't heard of it. But you can do the course. It's $195 through NAR. Also, it's a CE credential, so if you're needing some CE credits to get towards your license renewal, this is a very valuable way to get some credits to help you get into your next year of real estate. Okay, so workshops and base outreach. TAP program, transition assistance. So the DoD's transition assistance program, TAP, helps separating service members prepare for civilian life, including homeownership. There is ESO officers at various bases that you can reach out to do presentations. honestly, these people are there to help these people, transition to civilian life. And if you can find a creative way to, discuss with them what you can do for their service members, you will be part of their plugs that they will, then share with the various service members. Base housing office relationships. For those that are close to basis, this is a little bit more practical for you. But if you can find who works in the housing office, they can then share, who's been assigned permanently to that change of service station, and maybe be able to distribute your marketing materials, keep you on a list that can then have those people reach out to you directly. These relationships are just like any other that you build in this business, except this one is something that's going to be a constant revolving door. Service members are reassigned all the time. They may buy with you in 2026, and in 2027 they get reassigned to the West Coast, and they got to sell and move on. But those people that work in the housing office, they're there all the time. This is their job. This is where they live. They will continue to share with you people that get reassigned to the area, so that you can continue to have deals come through for new veterans and service members that you can help. VFW and American Legion Post. So there's a lot of these around the states. They have a couple in Charlotte. They offer lots of meetings for veterans and service members. You can offer to sponsor these meetings, with some sort of food and what have you. And when you do that, they'll give you airtime to kind of share a little bit about who you are, what you offer. It's just like any other event that workshop that you do, but this one is specifically targeting veterans. So for those of you that are close by to, American Legion specifically is everywhere. For those of you that are close by to one of those facilities, if you go to their website and your local chapter, you can typically find some contact information, and you can call, who that is and get started with trying to figure out a time when you can do a workshop for them. Now, I do have to emphasize this is going to take some investment on your side. So, think if they've got 20, 30, 40, 50 people, if you're bringing food, the cost can be a little bit on the higher side, but you are getting an event that introduces you to a lot of people. And so these types of workshops can be very lucrative, with the long-term side of it, which is these people end up using you or knowing someone that can use you for your services as a real estate agent. Now, VSO partnerships, organizations like Disabled American Veterans, Team Red, White, Blue, and local veteran groups all have active service networks. Google and AI is your best friend. So if you go to Google or you type in on AI, hey, I'm Ian Smith, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I want to find more veterans in the city that I can help buy or finance real estate for. What are local groups that I can reach out to, aside from just the obvious, that you can share with me? You're going to get posts back. You're going to get some research back. And these examples of Disabled American Veterans, Team Red, White, and Blue, these are just some small examples of groups that exist. There's millions, well, not millions, but there's a lot. There's hundreds of groups all across the country that are there to help veterans, and they're in almost every city, right? So you can typically find, some form of group, aside from what we've already talked about, in your place, and, looking them up, sponsoring them, doing what we've already talked about with American Legion, is going to help you in branching out into that network. Okay, so understanding the military client. So PCS move, so permanent change of station. Every 2 to 4 years, military orders service members to a new duty station. They receive a moving allowance and a report date, and they must close before it. Speed and flexibility are everything to these buyers. So, for these people, they typically are, going to have everything that they need in their life to be moved, and they need a home, and they need it quick. So these are quick turn times. You're going to get these people and have them close within 45, 60 days. And so, these are quick and fast deals, but, deals that, are going to close because they need it to. These are not going to be your very picky buyers that are going to go to every little house and, look under every nook and cranny. They know this is not their permanent home, most likely. They're not as concerned about the long term of the house. They just want a house that they're going to like. So they're going to be a lot quicker at moving forward. BAH. So this is the military housing allowance. So it's a stipend based on rank and the duty station, and it's designed to cover the local housing cost. So for those of you that live in higher cost areas, your veterans, not sorry, not your veterans, your service members are going to receive more BAH allowance than those that are in cheaper MSAs. Because the duty station does matter, right? So it has to keep up with cost of living of the area. So they're not going to give someone stationed in the middle of Iowa the same allowance as someone stationed in San Francisco, for example. The housing cost is just too different for that to make sense. So they do increase it based on the cost of living in the area, and they decrease it based on that as well. Their certificate of eligibility. This is another buzzword for you guys. So COE, as it's commonly referred to, this is how we determine a veteran's entitlement. We pool this, so I will pool this for you guys when a client completes an application. Some cases, they already have it readily available if they're smart and did their research online, which many of them are. So they'll go ahead and share it with me day one, and what that certificate of eligibility will tell me is their current entitlement. Have they been charged entitlement in the past? And there's another very key detail. Are they a disabled veteran? This is a key detail because disabled veterans get an extra perk on the VA home loan that reduces some of the transactional costs that they incur. And so it's important for me to know, are they a disabled veteran or not? Because I can then, charge them less money and be more kind to them on their finances. So the certificate of eligibility is one of the first things that we look at when we're dealing with veterans. So we want to make sure they have one. Not every veteran is going to qualify for various reasons, and so knowing this up front can save us from, putting them pre-approval with a VA loan and then having some sort of discovery in the middle of the loan process that says that they're not eligible actually, and then we all have an issue. ETS or EAS, this is known as end of service date. When a service member leaves active duty, ETS buyers are motivated and often have 60 to 90 day windows to close. Again, just like the PCS moves, these are going to be quick and fast. So, for you guys knowing the terminology difference, when you're working with veterans, because a lot of times they do speak in acronyms, is helpful because then you can kind of understand what you're going to be dealing with time. I mean, basic questions that you probably already do in your questionnaires are going to kind of figure this out too, but knowing these nuances are very helpful. VA MRPs, so minimum property requirements. VA appraisers check for safety, soundness, and sanitation, knowing what fails. Peeling paint, exposed wiring, no running water before showing VA buyers is important. We're going to dive into the VA appraisal here in a second, but VA appraisals are really not a big deal. A lot of people make them out to be, but they're not, and we'll talk about that in a second. The VA funding fee. So going back to that certificate of eligibility, as I mentioned, the VA funding fee is done in tiers. It's A, done based on are you disabled or not disabled, and then B, have you used entitlement, or is this your first time using entitlement? If this is repeat, so on and so forth. There's different percentages of the funding fee that get charged based on the answers to these questions. So for those that have used entitlement and are not disabled, they're going to pay a very high rate as long as they don't put down payment. So they'll have a higher funding fee. Those that are first-time users will have a lower funding fee, and if they put down payment as repeat buyers, it can reduce it as well. So funding fee is important, not so much for you guys, definitely more on my end, but your clients may ask, so knowing that funding fees vary based on their circumstances may be important because you may be asked. Okay, so building your military network. Base housing office, as we talked about, this is important. TAP ESO, this is your housing people over at the military base. If you're able to do workshops, that's going to be awesome. You'll talk to tons of different people that are all actively looking for the same thing, so your percentage chances of converting is much higher. Obviously, working with a VA lender, a VA certified lender that's knows what they're doing is important. VA loans are easy until they're not, and they're not easy for people that make very silly mistakes. They're very easy for those that work with these programs all the time and know the nuances of them. One of the things that does kill these loans the most is that some veterans, you will have a lot of extra pays depending on what they're doing, especially active service members. And not every lender knows how to read these pay stubs. These are very complicated pay stubs to read if you don't know what you're doing. And so some lenders can screw up what their pay is and then have a pre-approval that's not actually valid because it's overestimating their income, so on and so forth. So having an experienced lender is very important. Like I said, I don't particularly find these loans challenging, but they can be challenging for the untrained eye. Again, going back to building the network with relocation specialists. This again, it's a no-brainer. The more you can network with these types of people in groups, the better. Veteran-owned businesses. That's a big thing right now. Big initiative over the last several years is for veterans that are owning businesses to display that they're a veteran-owned business. If you go out and walk into those businesses, introduce yourself, shake their hand, thank them for their service, kind of tell them what you are, what you're doing, that you'd like to help others that are also veterans, they're very appreciative. Even if they know that you're also looking to grow a business and help yourself. By helping yourself, you're helping them too, especially if you're providing one of those value adds like Homes for Heroes, so on and so forth. They're going to be willing to share with their sphere, or at least help you find the sphere if you don't currently have one. And then social media is also a no-brainer. You're never, on the social side, you're never going to be able to advertise to military members and veterans if you don't advertise to military members and veterans. So, creating some content that shows them that you are, someone that they can talk to for buying a loan or buying a home, and that you're helping veterans like themselves, that could be the difference between them reaching out to you and not. I do think that veterans as a whole and service members specifically want to work with people that say that they work with that subgroup. So being able to say that and post about it, that's going to help get you the business. Okay, so competing with a VA offer. So this is the part where some agents don't love VA home loans. Because there's a stipulation that a VA home loan is not as qualified, or the appraisal is going to be challenging, or so on and so forth. So we'll start with the first myth. VA appraisals kill deals. I really don't agree. I've done VA loans since 2015, and I think out of that time, I don't actually think I've had a VA home not go through the appraisal process cleanly. I've had plenty of conventional, I've had several FHA. I don't ever think I've had a VA home loan that's been denied because of the property. They are thorough, so they're more thorough than your conventional appraisal, but they're not unreasonable. And to be honest, the main thing is they just want to make sure the home is safe and habitable. I think we all want our veterans to get into a home with, access to water, windows that close, no peeling paint that could expose them to dangerous chemicals. Those basic essentials you would have an issue with on your conventional appraisal as well, right? It may not be as thorough on the conventional appraisal, which is why sometimes they slip through more, but what we're looking for is safety and habitability. So I disagree with the assessment, and I really wanted to iron that in, because when you guys are making offers for clients that have a VA pre-approval, you may get pushback from the listing side. And so that pushback may be about the appraisal, and I can always connect with the listing side, make them happy, talk to them about my experiences, share with them what we're really looking for. But you can also do that too. And remember, safety and habitability is the two big things. The other myth is that VA home loans take too long to close. They don't. They're actually, because they are relatively easy loans, especially once we pre-approved them, we've already gone through the hard work. We can typically close these in 3 to 4 weeks. So I don't ever advertise more than 30 days for a VA loan. I think it's very reasonable to do it in 21 to 25. 30 is obviously preferred because, it doesn't mean everyone has to rush through the process. But for those situations where that's what wins the deal, 21 days is perfectly fine to do a VA appraisal. The other myth is that sellers won't accept VA offers. They won't accept VA offers because they think that the loans take too long. They think the appraisal will kill the deals. We just covered that. They just don't understand. It may be an agent that's never dealt with a VA loan before, so it's like scary to them. So then they go Google searching, and they hear that there's challenges with appraisals because that's what Google's going to pop up. Education. That's where I come in. I think all of y'all that have worked with me or know, my process know that when I have a client that's pre-approved, one of the things that I offer is to talk to the listing agent after you've submitted an offer. And that's not to share your client's personal details. That's not to cut you out of the process. That's essentially just to solidify what I'm giving them, which is a pre approval letter for our client that we share. Tell them why the client is qualified, tell them that financing is secure, and if they have questions about the VA side of it, that's where I'll answer them. The other myth is that VA buyers can't compete on price. So this is a funny one because sometimes the listing agents will be like, well, how if they're putting 0% down, how are they going to be able to? They obviously don't have any money, so how are they going to be able to be part of negotiations? Well, they're putting 0% down because they have the entitlement to do so. That usually means, especially for those that have savings, they have quite a bit of money in reserves that they can play around with. So I've actually seen the opposite. I've seen VA clients be more qualified than many other clients. And because they don't have the requirement to put down payment, they can be a little bit more nimble because they aren't putting 3 to 5%. They're putting 0% and just paying closing costs. So VA buyers absolutely can compete on price, and any negotiation that they go into, a lot of times they're going to be leading the way because they say, "Well, I wasn't putting a down payment, so let's go a little bit higher on the price," and that's okay. The VA home loan process. So for you all that have a client that goes under contract or that start with the process with, that is veteran or service member that wants a VA loan, this is the process. The first step is we verify their eligibility. So for me, I just want to make sure that they're actually VA eligible. I don't want to go through the whole rigmarole of talking about the VA loan, going through the pre-approval process, saying they're pre-approved, and then we get under contract and we find out because we didn't pull the certificate of eligibility day one that they're not actually. So we're going to verify that day one so we can just make sure that that's a thing. Once their eligibility is verified, then we're going to just do the standard pre-approval. So just like every other deal, we're going to make sure their debt to income ratio is where it needs to be, make sure their credit score is good. Assuming all that checks, we're going to issue the pre-approval. Then at that point, it's up to you guys to help find them a home. And then once they're under contract, we're going to get started with that VA appraisal. Assuming all goes well, we'll have underwriting and then we'll have closing. It's really not that many extra steps. It's actually just one. And so it's very straightforward. And like I said a couple times in this call, they're very easy loans. Okay, so now that I've said a lot of words, I want to open the floor to questions. I know that I covered a lot. I think, Amber, you sent a message. You use a VA loan and you've learned a little bit. Yes, you can get a copy of this presentation. I will send it to the Facebook group so everyone can download it from there. But does anyone have any questions about the content that I covered in today's call?
Yeah, I do have a question. This is Kirk.
Yeah.
So is there any time, just looking for your personal opinion here, is there ever a time when a conventional or other loan, such as a USDA, FHA, would work better for a client given they may not qualify for the reduced or waived VA fee if that person's still on active duty or they do not have a disability rating? Is there ever a time when you say, hey, the VA may not be the best route for that client?
Yeah, so a great question. The main scenario where sometimes it may not make sense is for a scenario where the veteran was already planning on putting a down payment and they have already used their entitlement, so now they're being charged repeat entitlement. If you recall, there's a funding fee that is assigned for every deal unless you're disabled, then it's waived. So it can be 1.25%, it can be 3.3%. For those that have already used entitlement and they don't have the waiver because of disability, those people will have to pay 3.3% as a funding fee. Now that's financed into the loan, so they're not paying it out of pocket unless they choose to. But that'd be a very good scenario for why it may be better for that service member veteran to go conventional because they can avoid that 3.3% fee. So there is some instances where I have in my career recommended a conventional home loan because that has no funding fee. So you're saving them 3.3% to add on to the loan amount, right? And that can be beneficial in that regard. But usually, if they're doing obviously no down payment, that kind of removes conventional altogether, unless you're doing down payment assistance, which has its own set of caveats. Usually, unless they're putting a noticeable down payment, it usually works out best to go with the VA home loan. In scenarios where you have a property that specifically says in the MLS that it's not eligible, because the seller said so, whatever the reason. I don't fully know the legality of that, but I've seen it in the past where it's just, the listing will just say conventional financing only. Those may be other scenarios where we just go with conventional because we're told to and the veteran really wants the home. But to go back to your question, it's usually only when they put a down payment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question, by the way. Bo, do you have any questions for me?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I had a some kind of designation, but it really didn't mean a lot. I think it was called military housing specialist or something. Um, but it doesn't have the same, um, I guess, significance as the MRP.
I think the MRP, just to clarify, that is still a NAR um, credential, right? So this is still
Right.
very much not a government issue credential. It's still a real estate credential. But I think going back to the example that I used, a lot of military members, they use banks like Navy Federal or USA, and you ask why, because USA charges a lot of money, Navy Federal charges a lot of money. You ask why? Well, it's because of the affiliation, right? The idea that you are affiliating with their group, right? So I think when it comes down to the credentials, they are helpful to learn the little nitty gritty bits, and a lot of them you will come with some help groups that you can join on, like Facebook and stuff, could really help with shaping your network of veterans and service members. But I think it's a lot of having that is to be able to advertise that you work with veterans and service members, and that you have an affiliation because of it. I hate to call it marketing, but that's kind of what it is. It's just marketing with actual value because you've learned more about them than the next person's going to learn.
Yeah, USAA, well, Navy Federal does it too. I think they still do, but um, one of the perks of that was they had a rebate program. USAA ended their rebate program quite a few years ago. I used to be part of relocation and would get a lot of USAA deals, but they don't
Yeah.
do that anymore. So I don't really see the advantage of going to USAA now, really, you know.
Well, I think they did such a good job in the past. I've been in this business since 2015, and I remember in the beginning years. I mean, no one could compete with them because they had those types of programs, right? But they don't do that anymore. But they solidified themselves as a very veteran focused organization, and so because of that, that name carries weight, and still to this day, even if they are charging the highest fees. It just kind of goes to show the power of the affiliation and what that can do. Um, I said something before a lot of you all joined. Veterans are highly taken advantage of. A lot of them, they don't really worry too much about their personal finances because, they either have some sort of stipend that comes from the federal government that they know is coming every month, so they don't think about finances as much as other people, or they just get themselves involved in situations where they can get taken advantage of because they're, off on duty and stuff like that. So one of the best ways to get into this space is finding that first deal and doing them a really good service. And I think I shared that I think Aaron Craw here, and Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's part of Home for Heroes, um, which is where you do a rebate back to your clients. Now, I'm not telling you guys what to do with your commissions, but providing some sort of value add for them that they can share with their sphere when you close their home, that is huge because they will remember that. They are very, very appreciative of people who take care of them. And if you do that, they will tell friends, family, service members, coworkers, etc. what you did, and that's a referral tree that starts from that one client. And I mean, I think when I look at my client trees and I look at the people I've worked with on the conventional side, just the regular everyday clients, yeah, I get referrals, but I don't get nearly as much out of those trees as I do from the veterans, so I don't know. Aaron, did you want to chime in on Homes for Heroes? I've been saying that I think 3 times now. And I'm not 1,000% sure.
Yeah. I joined Homes for Heroes a couple months back. I enjoy it. I think we make up for in volume what you might feel like you lose in a referral fee, especially if you market really well and just really make those connections. Um, we've been able to help a couple people in the past couple of months, and I'm just taking some notes here to try to reach out to some of the base housing officials. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. But if anybody has questions, I can drop my email here in the chat, and then I can get you connected with somebody if you're interested.
A quick follow up to that, because when we talked about Homes for Heroes, I told you that I had never taken part in the program, and I'm not even sure my company allows us to. We have our own Heroes program that we do internally, but with regards to that, do they provide those contacts, for you with the local bases nearby? Like, does the Home for Heroes kind of connect you to people that can help you kind of get started?
I haven't asked about connections with bases specifically. There may be some information that they do have. They're really responsive, and they send out just different emails about um, what some of the top agents are doing. So they'll like have recorded videos, and you can get some really good input on what other agents have done to gain access. So they do give you plenty of tips of what to do. Whether it start a website for my area, it might be 336 heroes, and some of the tips they might include will be to make sure you have a what is it 332 301 transfer or something for people that when they misspell. I mean, there's all types of tips and information that they'll dial in on sending out to different agents. They really want you to be active, and they're really helpful in helping you do that. And there's a bunch of information on the website, and they attach you to they give you a free subscription to something that you can use for marketing if you need help, kind of creating posts for your website. They also have a hero calendar, which has something for literally almost every single day. So I go in maybe 1 or 2 days, and I have scheduled posts for like the entire month, and I just have that stuff to post to my Instagram and Facebook, just scheduled, so I don't really have to worry about it. That way, you can kind of stay front of mind, and people know what you represent. But there's a lot of information and a lot of different tools on the website.
Yeah, that's cool. And guys, for those that aren't familiar with Home for Heroes, it's not exclusive to veterans and service members. It's other heroes as well. So this is pretty. It's a more encompassing, you know, uh, grouping that you're kind of advertising to with that than just the military. So for those of you that are trying to expand to police officers and such like that, like this is also something that you can use to advertise to those groups. But I appreciate you sharing, Aaron. Candace, I want to pick back up on you real quick before we call it a meeting here. So you shared that you had done a deal last year, and it was with a veteran. So from the content that we kind of went over today, how much of that was kind of a refresher versus new information?
Yeah, it was all a pretty good refresher on it. I mean, the transaction moved extremely quickly. It was actually Liz Tolliver that did the transaction, so I just kind of put it in her hands, and she just kind of contacted between me and the client and everything. So it all worked out really, really well. I think like right before closing, my client did have to come up with like $300 or $400 or so to go to closing or what have you.
Yep.
Not really, I don't really recall. Again, I was freshly new, so what those expenses come from, I'm really not quite sure. But yeah, it all worked out. I think it was a really smooth transaction and everything. We didn't have any problems. Appraisal all come back fine, so no worries on my end with it.
Well, two parts there. First, the part where the client came up with a couple $100 at closing. I mean, to get a home with a couple $100, I mean that's really hard to beat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we got about like 12,000 in closing costs. So yeah, we did
Yeah.
really good with that one.
Yeah, and right now with the market kind of sitting a little bit longer, some sellers are getting a little antsy, for
Yep.
their own plans, and so you are seeing sellers give more concessions right now. So, we call this stacking in this business. It's where you either combine like a VA program with a down payment assistance program, where you just combine it with seller paid credits. in theory, you can do these with no out of pocket, like your client basically did.
Yeah,
So that's really cool. Now, real quick question: were you the buyer's agent on that deal?
I was. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and did you have any pushback from the seller's agent or just extra questions on the pre-approval just because it was a VA loan?
No, because the sellers was also military, so they
Mhm.
completely already understood the process, which works out well around here. Usually both sides kind of they know what's going on.
Yeah, I think for those of us that are not near, military bases, you tend to run into much more agents that are very apprehensive and green on it. But those that are a little bit closer, you're going to find more agents that are familiar, and so you'll have less of that pushback that I mentioned. But that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I'm glad that
Yeah,
that went all smooth.
and that MRP certification, that's really well. It gives a lot of great information, so I do have that certification. And yeah,
Yeah.
what you learned there is very helpful with dealing with like VA cases.
Yeah, I think that when I was preparing this presentation, I had heard of the MRP in the past. It's not a credential for a lender. We have our own stuff, but
Yeah.
I had heard about it in the past and I'd seen it advertised and I've seen people have it in their email signature and all the things. But when I was preparing for today's presentation, I did a lot more research on it. And yeah, I mean, it's a very encompassing, like it covers way more than what I could have ever hoped to in a span of time that we covered in this call. So, for those of you that actually want to, go after veteran business, even though it's not affiliated with the U.S. government and you can't say that it is, it's still a very valuable tool. And going back to the marketing aspect, it's just something that you can also put out there that you are a professional in that because you have gone through much more training than anyone else would have.
hmm Now, I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
As far as like the TAP program, so that was going to be one of the next things that I do is kind of see who I can contact on the military bases and see what to do there. But with the TAP program, should I prepare like brochures or something like that when talking with these people? Like, what do I need to kind of give them to kind of, help them help me?
Yeah, so I think having like a basic, for them, you're not giving the full presentation, right? This is the person
Mhm.
that's connecting you with the ability to then connect with the service members.
Yeah.
So I would prepare something that specifically shows to the people in the offices like what you can do for these service members and how you can help and that can kind of help give you the credence to have them either give you some feedback on what you can do to get involved or
hmm
just help them understand what you are so they can then refer you that business. I think that getting involved in the military offices is going to be the hardest of the various options that we went over because you're kind of fighting with a lot of other people in the real estate industry to also get that same airtime.
hmm
So having yourself kind of prepared for that meeting is important, but more than that, having a value add. So in Aaron's case, being able to advertise that he does Home for Heroes, being able to give that credit back, to these service members, that's something that will obviously raise the eyebrow, but you don't always have to give away commissions to be a value add. There's other ways of doing so. So finding out what works for you and what you would like to advertise to them, I think is important before you go and push that meeting because that meeting is there to help you get in the scene, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, I actually don't currently have a connection on my side. It's hard. I don't live near a military base, so
Yeah.
it's hard for me to get that credence. I have a really close connection at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, whatever it's called these days.
hmm
And he has offered to make an introduction, but he keeps getting deployed every time he offers, so not always the easiest thing to act on. But
Yeah.
if you can get into that, that is just a constant stream because they are going to have people coming in and out all the time.
Exactly.
And there's
Yeah.
agents that literally their entire career, that's all they do.
Yeah.
Once they get that connection, that is just it's basically a spigot of business.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Now,
sure they got their true connections already, so it's gonna be a hard one.
I wouldn't say that. It's you've got competition, but you put something together, provide a value add. The last person could have screwed something up, and they heard about it. So you never know. Timing is everything.
True.
Just like with all the stuff that we do, following up. The follow up game is where it's at. If you continue following up month after month, year after year, one day someone's going to screw up and they're going to be like, you know what, Candace, let's give you a call.
That's right. There you go. Good point.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah,
before I
I
wrap, does
second
anyone
that.
else?
You go.
Did you say Aaron?
Sorry, I was just offering some encouragement. I was going to say I second that. Like they might have somebody, but they don't have you. You just never know who you might connect with when you go in there. So I would definitely just give it a try if you're thinking about it.
Exactly.
Hey,
Exactly.
and I got a quick question. You briefly touched on saying that something about an internal heroes program. What can you elaborate on that?
It's kind of funny. I realized at about 11:50, just before this call, that I didn't even include the benefits of North Group Mortgage with what we do for veterans. So we waive their processing and underwriting and application fees. So that's like $16.95 in fees. That is completely waived
How
by
much in fees?
working with us. 16.95. Yeah,
16.95.
16.95. It does depend on the state. So Georgia's a little cheaper. It's nuances state by state, but just somewhere between $1,500 and $1,700 is waived depending on the various states by just them being a veteran. So the only cost that they pay for us is their credit report, their appraisal, um, the like monitoring services that we have to do for underwriting, and then their closing fees. And if you got seller paid credits, I mean, it can usually cover for all of that. So we don't charge any lending fees for any veteran deals that we do.
Okay. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I should have put that in my slides today. So I really appreciate you asking the question. It makes me realize I need to put something out there on it. So I'll definitely do that. But yeah, that's one of the perks. And I've worked at quite a few lending companies over the years. This is my I think sixth since I started. None of them ever provided that benefit. That's like completely unique to Guaranteed Rate and North Group Mortgage.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, and just so you know, that doesn't come at the sacrifice of their rates either. We don't inflate the rates just to give the offset. We look at the rate sheet side by side without the benefit. It's the same thing. So
All right.
cool. Well, Eddie, Calvin, Kirk, do you all have any questions before we jump off?
Pretty short answer, most of them. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time putting this together.
Of course, I appreciate you joining and love the background.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was
Yeah.
thinking yesterday. So
Heck yeah. Kirk, Eddie,
Good information. Thank you.
of
Good
course, appreciate you
information.
jumping on
Thank you.
today. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate everyone jumping on. I'll turn y'all back over to your afternoons. Good luck with the rest of the week. And as always, if you need to reach me, you can find me, and I'll be more than happy to help you guys. Okay.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks so
All
much.
right. Bye bye.